I want to take a couple minutes and talk about three of the most common ways that combat veterans justify, rationalize to themselves the act of killing in war, and what I think are the limitations of some of these common ways of making meaning of killing. A very common reason people cite or explanation, justification is it was either him or me. Right? I had to kill that person so I could come home alive. Or I had to kill that person so my buddies, my team, could come home and reunite with their families. It was him or me. And at the moment, no doubt, in a firefight, it feels very much, because it is him or me, him or us, and someone's going home alive and it's going to be us. It's exactly precise, a very common way of feeling in a firefight. But there's a problem with that argument in the bigger picture, and it's one that tends to hit people when they come back home or when they get out of the military, and that is, it was him or me because we flew 14,000 miles over to his country, and then we got in a helicopter and we landed, a train feature away from his house, and then we went up and we surrounded his house at night, and we called him out, and instead of coming out peacefully, he took an AK-47 and started shooting at us, and we returned fire and killed him. It's hard to make the case that we're standing our ground when we went to their ground. So even though psychologically it makes sense at the moment, it struggles from the bigger picture, because someone could just say, well, why did you go there? You created the situation in which it was him or me. Another common justification, rationalization, is that, hey, we are just soldiers of the state. We are doing our duty, and so I am not responsible for the killing because I'm doing it on behalf of the country. And it's true that we are soldiers of the state, and it's true that we are not acting in a personal capacity, that we are acting on behalf of the nation that we represent and the nation that we're defending. But the fact that we're doing that could not and would not justify an act if the act itself is wrong. So, for example, we may be soldiers, but we know that if our commanding officer tells us to line up civilians and to execute them, that it's our moral and legal duty to refuse to do so. Right? We should have learned from the Nuremberg trials, and we know that it's not enough to say I was just following orders, that the orders themselves have to be moral orders. And so to say that we are servants of the state, so therefore we're not responsible or morally blameworthy for the killing we do, just doesn't stand up. We are servants of the state. That's why we're there doing it in the first place. And that's very good and noble to put ourselves out there. But we also recognize that even as servants of the state, we should not do anything that is morally wrong in and of itself. And so, once again, that argument, upon further reflection, tends to fall apart. A third justification, rationalization that people tend to use are religious reasons, right? To say, especially people who base their moral conduct on the teachings they find in Scripture or through their religion. And they'll say, hey, the Ten Commandments really say thou shalt not murder, right? We know that after Moses came down with the Ten Commandments, the Israelites were still engaging in wars with the approval of God. And so clearly the prohibition against murder doesn't mean that we cannot kill in the context of a war. Jesus had several encounters with centurions, sort of the equivalent of a Roman company commander, in which he was praiseworthy. To one, he said, I've never seen greater faith in all of Israel. He didn't tell him he needed to give up his profession. Right? The first Gentiles to convert, Cornelius, again a centurion, doesn't say anything about him changing his profession. So there are those arguments on behalf of it, but those arguments only work for those who share those beliefs. Right? So even if you're a devout Jew or Christian, and you can turn to scriptures and teachings to say, this is what makes sense for me, and that works for you, it won't work perhaps for your Buddhist or for your atheist or agnostic soldier for whom you may have a duty to explain to him why it's morally right. So we really want to find an argument that works for all Americans, a grounds for understanding the morality of killing that would work for all Americans.